Hello, Year 5. Happy new week. Hope you're doing well. Good to see you again. We are looking at war, conflict, and Christianity this half term. We're moving away from pacifism this lesson. So, last lesson and the lesson before, we looked at Quakers. Quakers always oppose war because they are pacifists, which means that they seek peace instead of violence. This lesson, we're going to look at a way in which Christians can decide whether a war should be fought and whether a war is good or bad. It's called just war theory, Just war theory. It comes from a guy called St. Augustine, who lived actually about 1,600 1,500 years ago, but it's still a theory that's used today in deciding whether wars are right. So, there are situations in which Christians will, at least some Christians, will choose to go to war, and we're going to find out what those are. So, last lesson we looked at the Quakers. Some Christians argue that war is sometimes, and this is a really important term, the least worst option. Okay, so there are no Christians out there who say, yes, I love war, war is brilliant, killing people is the best, can't wait to go to war and kill lots of civilians. For some people, however, war is the least worst option. So, for example, if a foreign country was threatening to invade Britain and enslave the population, some Christians would say that going to war to protect the country would be the least worst option, even if people die. Although some people might die in the war, more people would die if we didn't go to war, they argue. Okay, so have a quick think about that. War can sometimes be the least worst option. Okay, so here's St. Augustine. This is the person whose theory we're going to look at today. He lived over 1,500 years ago, which is a really long time. So he was actually a lot closer to the birth of Jesus than he is to us now. He argued that Christians should have a way of working out if war is the right thing to do. He put forward the just war theory. And this just, we're using it in a different sense here to how we might be used to. Just in this sense means fair or correct and comes from the word justice. So it's like fair war theory, just war theory. St. Augustine, very important guy in Christianity. He's not just important for just war theory. He actually came up with a lot of different Christian theories. Now, we're going to look at this on the next slide, but you actually have the parts of just war theory that we're going to look at here. So you might want to have these in front of you to help you to understand. They are a little bit complex. There's something I wouldn't normally teach until year 7 or year 8. So I just thought it was interesting to go over them with you. I've tried to make them as simple and straightforward as possible, but we won't perhaps fully understand them until we apply them to some wars in our history. So the main task for today's lesson is going to be looking at 2 wars that took place and deciding whether those wars fit this just war theory. But before we do that, let's look through the theory. Okay, so in order for a war to be just or fair, it must meet these conditions. So I'm going to go through them. Again, you've got these written down and you can always refer back to them. War must be a last resort. It must be it must only be an option once everything else is tried. It has to be the last thing people try. So you have to try going and speaking to the other people. You have to try negotiating with them. You have to try compromises. If all of that fails, then perhaps you should consider war. There has to be a just, remember just means fair, there has to be a just cause. So there must be a good reason for going to war, like opposing evil or threats. So you can't go to war, for example, if you decide that you want to invade another country to get their money or their oil or their land. There has to be a just or fair cause. Opposing evil, protecting people, stopping lives from being lost, those are just fair causes. Okay, the next one, there has to be a likely success. So there must be a good chance of success so that people don't die needlessly. There's no point in sending thousands of people to die in war if there's no hope of winning it and being able to oppose the evil that you've gone to war to fight. So there has to be a good chance of winning the war. Okay, this is a good word, proportional. You might not have heard of proportional before. It must be a proportional response, and that means not using more force than is necessary compared to the threat. So, for example, in the Second World War, America dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, and they killed thousands upon thousands of people. They released a lot of poisonous radiation into the air. And a lot of people argue that that's not a proportional response. Some people argue that it's good because it brought the war to an end. Other people say war has to be proportional. If someone is threatening you with a knife, you shouldn't set fire to their entire house and kill everyone who's in it. It has to be proportional. And finally, there has to be an exit strategy. So there must be a way to bring the war to an end as quickly as possible. Some of the wars that have been going on during your lifetime, like the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, those have gone on for 10, almost 15 years, a really, really long time. And they don't really meet this idea of having an exit strategy, a way of ending a war. So let's just go through these again, and then we're going to see how we apply them. It has to be the last option that's been tried, that's last resort. There has to be a good reason, that's just cause. There has to be a good chance of success, that's likely success. It has to be proportional, which means not using more force than is necessary. And there has to be an exit strategy, a way of ending it. And if a war meets these requirements, then it can be said to be a just or fair war. Okay, so the theory will make more sense if we look at a couple of case studies. We can look at some facts, well, we can't discuss it in groups or pairs, unfortunately, but we can discuss it amongst ourselves. And then we can decide whether going to war would be just or not. So, two examples of war that we're going to look at. You've actually got a copy of these slides here, so that you can pause the video, you can read through them yourself after we've read through them together, and you can then go back to the previous page and you can think about how these just war standards apply to these wars, because that's what you're going to write about here. But I'll talk more about that in a second. So, in 1939, Britain had been trying to negotiate with Nazi Germany and had said that if they didn't invade Poland, there would be no need for war. Germany had made clear that it intended to spread its power across Europe and had already invaded a number of countries before it actually did invade Poland. Britain had a fairly big army and navy and could work with other Allied powers in Europe and abroad to fight Germany. Germany had shown it was happy to use military force to invade other countries, and they had been mistreating the Jewish population of Germany. The Second World War lasted for 6 years. So I'd like you to pause the video. I'd like you to go back to the just war criteria here, the just war theory here, and I would like you to decide whether you think this war meets the just war standards, and if you think there's any of them that it doesn't meet, I'd like you to explain to yourself why. So pause the video. Okay, welcome back. So let's have a look at the next war. This is a war that took place in the 1980s called the Falklands War, which you might have heard of before. I'm going to read through this and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pause it so that you can have a look and compare it to the just war theory. So, in 1982, a country in South America called Argentina invaded the British territory of the Falkland Islands. They are around 8,000 miles from Britain and home to 3,000 British residents. Margaret Thatcher, who's the Prime Minister, sent warships, submarines, helicopters and aircraft carriers to the area to fight the Argentinians and take back control of the islands. In the fight, 255 British soldiers, 649 Argentine soldiers, and 3 Falkland Islanders lost their lives. The British sank a warship called the Belgrano, which was sailing away from the islands. The war lasted for 10 weeks. So again, pause the video. You can reread that if you need to. Go back. Does this meet, given the information that you've got, the criteria of it being a just war? Now, I can't tell you the right answer or the wrong answer for any of these because it's very what's called subjective. It depends who you talk to as to whether they think these are just and fair wars or not. So pause the video. Okay, welcome back. Right, so what I would like you to do is choose either the Second World War or the Falklands War, and then explain here whether you think it meets the just war criteria. So you could say the Falklands War does or does not meet the just war criteria because, and then I would like you to explain using full sentences. You're in year 5 now, so that shouldn't be difficult for you to do. Here's the last slide for today's lesson. So there's no right or wrong answers to these questions, even though some Christians will have very strong opinions. Quakers will always oppose war because they are pacifists. Some Christians use just war theory to help work out where war is the least worst option. Next week, we are looking at Christians in the military and how they deal with the realities of war. So, again, I hope that's been interesting for you. If you've got any questions, please don't feel afraid to email me and ask. The stuff that we looked at today, like I say, I normally do it with year 7. So it is quite challenging, but I really think you're up to the challenge. You know, as a year group, year 5, you're very, very on the ball. You're really good at understanding these things. But if you do need help, absolutely reach out, email me, and I'll get back to you. Hopefully I will see you, I will see you next week. Have a great weekend and enjoy the nice weather. Bye. Bye, year 5.